Hi, I'm Trisha Grooms, a licensed master social worker. And currently, I work for the statewide outreach center as a mental health outreach coordinator. I recently retired as a counselor at Texas School for the Deaf. I worked as a counselor for 20 years with kids ranging in age from 3 to 12 years old. I worked in the human service field for over 36 years. I would like to share a bit about my upbringing to give you a general idea of how I grew up as a deaf child. I was born hearing and was adopted at the age of 3 to 4 weeks old to hearing parents. I lost my hearing at the age of about 18 months old. I had a high fever accompanying chickenpox. I also had a very unusual, very strange case of chickenpox as well. My chickenpox only occurred from the chest up, and some of the chickenpox actually got into my ears. Now, I was told that my auditory nerve died as a result. I am profoundly deaf. My mother was told by the doctors that the only choices she had were either to send me to TSD or to send me to Sunshine Cottage School. And Sunshine Cottage School is in San Antonio, Texas. The doctor that told my mother this was a military doctor, so it could be that the resources he had access to were limited. Of course, my mother did not want to send me away to TSD. I was only 3 years old at the time. And so my mom then decided I would go to Sunshine Cottage School. When I began school at Sunshine Cottage, my mother was informed that I was not to use any sign language or any gestures and must try to use speech to communicate. And that was the only way to develop language. And I remember clearly to this day that my mom and I were in our kitchen at home, and I really wanted a cookie that was in a jar on top of the refrigerator, and I tapped my mother and pointed at the cookies. I wasn't using any sign language. I was only pointing to the cookies that I wanted so badly. I was jumping with excitement, and my mom told me no, that I must use spoken language to ask for a cookie. Mind you, I was 3 years old and did not yet have fully developed language. Both my mother and I were absolutely exhausted and ended up on the floor. We were frustrated. I couldn't say the words correctly, and my mother felt it was necessary for me to say them correctly. As you can imagine, there were similar situations both at home and at Sunshine Cottage at school. Shortly after that, we moved to San Angelo, Texas, which is in West Texas. I was put into a school that had a program for deaf children, and at the time, I had a teacher who used the total communication method with me. So I had access to both spoken language and sign language starting that year, my kindergarten year. I started mainstreaming in first grade and was mainstreamed thereon with accommodations of sitting up front and a note taker when I got older. I did not have interpreters ever. I did have access to the resource room, as they called it, up until 6th grade, and took speech therapy for 13 years. I graduated from Smithson Valley High School and then went to Texas State University, TSU, in San Marcos. I had to drop out due to a struggle to access those classes. This was before ADA became law. I then went back to TSU in 1993 and was able to get interpreters for all of my classes and graduated with both my BA and MA in social work. Now, I will say, looking back, I truly wish I had interpreters so that I had access to visual language. I had to work so hard at lip reading, but with sign language, I probably could have been at the top of my class. I was about 30th in my class of over 500 students. You can imagine the work it took. Had I an interpreter, I would have easily excelled. So it's interesting to reflect on that. And now for my family dynamics. I grew up in a hearing family. My mother was a single mother. She was divorced when my brother was about 10 and I was about 8 years old. My grandparents were heavily involved with me. I lost my mother to cancer at the age of 17. My grandmother was a retired teacher, so she spent a lot of time teaching me to read and learn the English language. You know, when it came to English, my grandmother was a stickler for proper grammar. She was very particular about that. And looking back, I just think, wow. And she continued to work with me until she passed away when I was 18. My grandfather gave me the love of history and storytelling. So many of those things that they did and spent time with me doing, I now spend time with my family. My family dynamics now look similar. I have a hearing family. My husband is hearing, and the two of us have been married for 39 years now. We have 2 adult children and 5 grandchildren, all of whom are hearing. Now, if you were to ask me if any of them sign fluently, I'd have to say no, they do know some sign language, but it varies. So, that is my upbringing in a nutshell, just to give you an idea. Over the years, mostly in my childhood years, I have experienced many, many things. Discrimination, lack of access to communication or language, being bullied, being abused, heartaches, isolation, suicidal ideation, you name it. I've experienced it. However, I had grit, determination, motivation, and thankfully, I had access to counseling with a person who knew me well. I did not do well with someone telling me what I can't do, especially with things that I wanted to try, such as riding a bicycle in the streets, playing the viola, or being in sports on hearing teams, cheerleading, driving, and so forth. I was a very rebellious kid. I would say that since then, I have calmed down quite a bit. And what am I doing now? I am raising 3 of my grandchildren with my husband. My grandchildren are ages 7, 5, and 2. And I'm enjoying my semi-retirement by riding or cruising on my motorcycle with my husband, gardening, and trying new things. Before we dive into this webinar, I want you to take care of yourself. Be sure to take care of yourself. There may be something triggering in the presentation that may make you feel uncomfortable, or you just have some uncomfortable feelings. So it's just very important that you take care of yourself. Please do, whether it be taking a break or taking some deep breaths, do whatever works for you. Many parents have asked me Very similar questions, so I thought I would include them in today's presentation. The 4 most commonly asked questions are, does my child's deafness cause bad or disruptive behaviors? What do these behaviors mean? Why does my deaf child behave that way? And will my deaf child be normal? If you have questions that are not listed here and are not included in these 4, it is possible that this presentation may answer some of your questions, but if not, please do reach out to me through email or video phone. My email and phone number will be posted at the end of this presentation. Does being deaf cause disruptive or bad behaviors? Some examples, possibly, of these behaviors are tantrums on the floor, banging on the table, hitting another child, or grabbing a toy from another child. Are those behaviors that you're seeing indeed caused by being deaf? Just being deaf causes those? No, it does not. Being deaf does not cause those behaviors. There are many factors that contribute to those behaviors, and that's what we'll be discussing today, those different factors, rather than being deaf causing behaviors. The behaviors I just mentioned are very typical of any child going through a developmental stage and who is unable to communicate or understand what is happening. Hearing children have the same behaviors when they haven't developed those communication skills yet. Just think about that age. Think about a 2-year-old child who is still developing and learning to navigate the world. You'll see the same behaviors. It's very typical. However, if that child is a deaf child and is much older than a typically developing child at that stage, that's an indication of concerns that may need to be addressed. If not hearing loss, then what causes those behaviors? There are several factors to look at that may cause behaviors that are unacceptable or disruptive. First is a lack of language development, language deprivation, or communication neglect. Those are something to think about, so we want to keep an eye on that. Behavior as a whole is communication. The way we behave is how we communicate. We don't always have to have words. So just be aware that behavior is communication. Behaviors such as banging on the table, temper tantrums on the floor, hitting, or sitting quietly on the couch ignoring you, crying, throwing things, yelling, or pulling on your arm. What do they mean when they show these behaviors? Are they trying to get your attention? Banging on the table, pulling your arm, or yelling can be an indicator of getting your attention. Or it could be something else. Could it be that they're expressing emotion? It's something to be aware of. I wanted to mention that anger is a secondary feeling. So what are they really feeling behind that anger? Because when children become angry, there is always a primary feeling that causes anger. And those feelings can be shame, humiliation, embarrassment, fear, frustration, threat, uncertainty, or depression. Oftentimes, anger is easier to feel than emotional pain. A child who cannot hear communicates mainly through behaviors, just like a hearing child whose communications have not yet developed. Parents need to pay close attention to how a deaf child is behaving. Be mindful of what is happening and when. For example, for young children, at the age of maybe 3 or 4, grabbing a toy from another child. That's quite normal behavior for that age. But if that child continues to do so into the age of 6 or 7 or 8 years old, they're still doing that. That should not be happening. Not in that way. So could there be some language gaps? Not knowing how to ask the other child to give them the toy? So those are things that are very important to pay attention. Pay attention to what's happening and who's doing it. Is it another child? Is it your child? You have to really pay close attention. For young children, that inability to make themselves understood or to process their emotions may be leading to self-isolation, to tantrums, or to behavioral issues. And that is a quote from Leanne Sherrill, a speech pathologist. This statement made by Ms. Sherrill applies to hearing children who are mute or have a speech impediment. And while there are similarities with the self-isolation, etc., the hearing children do have access and are able to understand the language and what others are saying and have access to incidental learning, etc. That being said, imagine a deaf child trying to make themselves understood as well as trying to understand the other person's information that is being communicated. Talk about a major double whammy. And then some. Due to the inability to access incidental learning in their surroundings. Access to language development in the first 5 years of life is critical in developing social skills and emotional well-being. For those with hearing loss, the language process needs to be observable as well. For example, in an environment, sometimes maybe going to a preschool or pre-K, you'll see different colors and shapes and numbers and the alphabet that's visible on the walls. But they need more. Sign language, gestures, pointing, role play, all of those are really important, observable things that they need to have access to. Now, language deprivation or language delays or communication issues can lead to social, emotional, and behavioral problems in the long run. Language deprivation, I'm going to go through the Google definition, which you can look at on your own, but their definition is the lack of exposure to accessible language. So let me say that again. Language deprivation is the lack of exposure to accessible language. And the key word here is accessible. Every human has a window of opportunity that is optimal for first language learning. Therefore, the consequences of language deprivation can be cognitive delays in literacy, planning, problem solving, attention, memory organization, number manipulation, abstract concepts, and the list goes on. Language deprivation has a negative impact on emotional regulation and social and educational development. There can be some serious mental health difficulties as well. Now for incidental and informal learning. Deaf and hard of hearing people frequently lack access to incidental and informal learning. For example, think of your family gatherings where so many conversations are happening. Maybe someone is talking about the news. Maybe someone's saying, I can't believe they did this, but I told that person I'm sorry. So much chatter is happening. Maybe some kids are talking about sports games or a video game. Many conversations are happening. Hearing children overhear a lot in the environment and can learn through this process of incidental learning. Deaf children cannot hear any of that. They don't have access to incidentally learning that way. Unfortunately, often these situations that are ripe for incidental learning are taken for granted or not recognized as such. This can be viewed as hearing privilege by those who are deaf or hard of hearing. Having the ability to access incidental and informal learning can help deaf children of all ages accumulate more knowledge and more information, which leads to increased skills in problem solving, higher vocabulary and literacy, and leadership. Dinner table syndrome, or communication neglect. In the article, What is Dinner Table Syndrome and Why Does It Matter?, Estefania Peña she stated that the dinner table syndrome describes the phenomenon in which deaf people and hard of hearing are continuously left out of conversations. They observe their family or friends enjoy their conversations with each other while striving to keep up. Or, worse, finding themselves unable to comprehend anything. In the US, 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, and 88% of the parents do not learn sign language to communicate with their child. A decision that impacts deaf children for the rest of their lives. Even though being excluded is not intentional, deaf and hard of hearing people feel excluded and become stressed, lonely, angry, and feel unimportant. The constant buildup of the pain of being left out at family gatherings has caused many to dread going home for the holidays and special events when they are adults. Deaf people often use disengagement as a coping mechanism when they are at events like this, such as zoning out, scrolling through their phone or book, or they may wolf down their meal so that they can ask to be excused early, or they may eat alone in another room. And I will say, to this day, I still use this coping mechanism, and I'm 56 years old. I often tend to be the one in the kitchen cooking or serving food, etc., and making sure all is taken care of. I have a few friends who know when they see me do this, and they will stop me and have me sit and chat with them, or they will help me and just be with me. So, yes, it still happens. For obvious reasons, deaf and hard of hearing people have a stronger need for visual orientation. Examples of visual orientation can be visual language, such as sign language, written words, pictures, etc., or environmental surroundings. Seeing how things work, seeing what is happening in their surroundings, watching human interactions, and so forth. However, visual orientation is often a factor inadequately provided to deaf people early on. This impacts problem-solving skills and adjustments. Mental states are not observable. You just can't see them. Think about your beliefs, intentions, desires, knowledge, etc. How do you get those mental states? Oftentimes, these states come from incidental learning. Others come from family passing on beliefs and tradition, going to church, or being involved in various community events, watching the news. Intentions and desires are often part of your motivation or your thinking process. These mental states impact your perspective-taking skills. As a former counselor working with deaf children, I often see issues with perspective-taking skills. Many of the children struggled with this concept due to the lack in age-appropriate social skills, expressing feelings, and assuming that others are just like them in the way they think, and lack understanding of etiquette, empathy, and gratitude. Mental health. What does mental health mean to you? Many would share with me that mental health is, many people will say depression, bipolar, mental health disorder. However, they often overlook general mental health of us all. Just general things that impact our mental health, such as not being happy with something, maybe being in a toxic relationship, or maybe a toxic work environment, the death of a loved one, losing a job, getting married, or having a baby, buying a house. Those things certainly can impact our mental health. And how we take care of ourselves is indeed a reflection of our mental health care. However, continuously being exposed to something painful or feeling not safe can and does impact mental health negatively in the long run, possibly creating an unhealthy quality of life. Now I want to talk about the general positive and negative impacts to our mental health, just in general, in things that we experience all the time. Stress, for example. Stress is a pretty easy one to identify that will impact your mental health regardless of the stress you experience. Stress can be positive and it can be negative. For example, positive stress is called eustress, which can be getting married, graduating high school, buying a new car, getting a new job. Those are very exciting positive things, but they can also be stressful. Negative stress is called distress, and that can be being in a toxic relationship, the loss of a job, dealing with a serious illness, divorce, death of a loved one, failing a test or getting bad grades, etc. So that's stress. Now let's talk about body changes. Those can have an impact on your mental health. Body changes tend to be on the negative side more than positive, but it can be viewed as a positive. Puberty, that's a big one for kids. That can be positive or it can be negative. It can go either way. Cancer or a severe illness can be a very negative thing. Weight gain or weight loss, either one can be either positive or negative. Becoming physically stronger with exercise, that could be a positive thing about in regards to a body change. Now, shifting over to sadness and excitement. We're not talking about true depression. We're just talking about typical sadness. We all experience being sad. Think about how these feelings can impact your mental health. Perhaps being sad, what do you typically do? You may cry, or you may sleep more. You may eat more or less, become unmotivated for just a little while, and then move on. It's what it typically looks like in general. And the same with excitement. You might be full of energy. You might be unable to sleep or have trouble controlling yourself. So that also impacts your mental health in a different way. Nervousness. That can be both negative and positive. Think about a new job. Wow, a new job can make you incredibly nervous, but it's exciting as well. It may mean more money or a change, something new, or you finally got a job. Or meeting new people, or giving a public presentation or speech. Those can all be positive. But the negative aspects sometimes you may back out, or it makes you want to vomit, or something like that. So it can be negative. Fatigue. This can impact your mental health. If you are constantly fatigued and struggle with keeping up with the daily grind. Perhaps health issues are the culprit, such as lack of sleep, diabetes, thyroid issues, etc. These can impact your mental health in general. Behaviors. How you behave with other people and how they respond to you can have an impact on your mental health through your thought process or ability to manage your thoughts and perceptions. So, all of these things I've mentioned that we experience. Think about when a deaf or hard of hearing child is experiencing these and does not have access to incidental learning or is not able to share with others about their feelings, concerns, and such when dealing with different life events. Often the negative impacts are much stronger and have longer lasting effects. A Gallaudet University research study from the Center for Deaf Health Equity was done in July of 2020. The study found language deprivation or communication neglect increases deaf children's risk for heart conditions, depression, and other diseases. Communication neglect. This is poor indirect family communications and ongoing exclusion from incidental learning and family communication and conversations. If a child reports feeling left out or not included in family communication, this increases the child's risk of anxiety and depression disorders by 34%. We must be mindful of all of these things when it comes to a lack of communication or communication neglect or language deprivation. It does have a significant impact on mental health. Now I want to talk about mental health disorders. Before we get into mental health disorders, it is important to be aware that deaf children have a need to explore a wider visual field than hearing children. Hearing children can focus their attention on what they are doing while accessing other information via auditory means. This need causes deaf children to shift their attention in the environment more often. As a result, the behaviors can be perceived by others as hyperactive, or inattentive. However, these behaviors might be considered an adaptive function and be necessary for them to not lose track of what goes on in their environment. As a result, it is important for mental health professionals to be aware before making a diagnosis of a mental health disorder for a deaf or hard of hearing child. Best case scenario would be an interdisciplinary team approach with an understanding of a trial and error philosophy. For example, parents, therapists, teachers, behavior support staff can share information of what they see in how the child behaves, what the child is struggling with, etc., while at the same time identifying a lack of skills versus having skills but still does not do well. That way, the psychiatrist or doctor has more information that can help in determining the diagnosis. That being said, it is important to have appropriate and thorough evaluations. I want to share what I have seen and continue to see in terms of mental health diagnoses with deaf and hard of hearing children. Not all have mental health issues, but it is imperative to keep an eye on their mental well-being. For example, when COVID happened, children who are happy and doing well developed depression and or anxiety during the lockdown and struggled with integrating back into the community. And those kids were doing great. And then they were no longer doing well. And so it's so important to keep an eye on mental health. Now, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. There are 3 types: inattentive, hyperactive impulsive, and combined type. Most of the time, it is usually the combined type that is the most common. ADHD impacts the executive functioning of the brain, resulting in various struggles in areas of social, academics, behaviors, and daily functions. Clinical depression, persistent sadness, and lack of interest or pleasure in previously enjoyable activities. Depression is a common and serious medical illness that negatively impacts how you feel, the way you think, and how you act. Typically, we'll see this in older children, but it does happen to younger children as well. What causes depression? Childhood experiences, life events, styles of thinking, other mental health issues, physical health problems, medication, recreational drugs, and alcohol. As I mentioned earlier, depression is common for older deaf children and hard of hearing children due to their own childhood experiences. Self-worth is greatly impacted by the way they think of themselves. Anxiety, feelings of fear, dread, and uneasiness. Experiencing occasional anxiety is normal. However, anxiety can become a disorder when frequently having intense, excessive, and persistent worry and fear about everyday situations. Anxiety disorders interfere with daily activities and are often difficult to control. I typically see this in children who have experienced trauma or have been adopted. DMDD, Disruptive Mood Dysregulation Disorder. That is typically used with children who experience ongoing irritability, anger, and frequent intense temper outbursts. When these behaviors cannot be explained by depression or other disorders, DMDD is diagnosed. For children with DMDD, the tantrums may become less frequent as they get older. The reason that I bring this up is because there are some behaviors that are typically part of developing and growing up. It is important to be aware of typical developmental stages in children so that you can be mindful of various behaviors that might occur and are part of growing up. As a result, you can address the behaviors accordingly. For ages 0 to 5 years old, what are some of the typical behaviors we see in this age group that are part of development? Crying, temper tantrums, saying no to requests, running off, taking toys away from others, being bossy. These behaviors are all part of developing attachments, meeting their needs, wanting to explore, developing assertiveness, developing various social skills. For 6 to 12 years old, what are some of the typical behaviors in this age group? Independence in various areas, personal hygiene, for example, pouring their own drink, basically telling their parents, "Let me do it," or "Go away." They can be moody or argumentative. For 13 to 18 years old, what are some of the typical behaviors in this age group? Argumentative, secretive, finding themselves or their identity, more independence. They may be more distant. These behaviors can occur as early as 10 years old. It really depends on the environment, friends, when puberty started. There is some overlap with behaviors of this age group and the 6 to 12-year-old age group. Here are some examples of developmental stages in various areas. In the language development stages, at 3 years old, the so-called age of communication, they start communicating by describing things, symptoms, etc., as well as they start asking questions. Another example is at 4 years old, they should have 2,000 words and 5 or more word sentences. In the play developmental stages, from 2 to 3 years old, it's more of associative play. The children tend to sit close or next to each other, but are not playing together. They're playing by themselves. At 4 to 6 years old, you will see cooperative play. That is when they start developing and use social skills playing together. Sharing at this age is another factor. In the psychosocial development stages, at 6 to 11 years old, children need to cope with new social and academic demands. Success leads to a sense of competence, which failure results in feelings of inferiority. At 12 to 18 years old, teens need to develop a sense of self and personal identity. Learning about the developmental stages in various areas and ages can be useful information all the way through teen years and beyond. Remember, these stages are not set in stone. Kids will develop and learn at their own pace. The developmental stages are just rough guidelines of what you can expect and about when. Stages are predictable patterns. Now, I want you to be mindful of the wording used in those groups or stages. You may read that it says things like learning to speak or to talk. Now, it's easy to take that as something that must be spoken. But learning words does not mean it has to be spoken words. These could be signed words or both spoken and signed words. About how many children have a remarkably high vocabulary that is not spoken language. Just keep in mind and be careful how you take that statement. When you see behaviors that are not typical of that age group or lack of those behaviors, that is when you should become concerned and take appropriate action to address those behaviors. For example, if a 9-year-old child is throwing temper tantrums, this can be an indicator of one of two things, or both. The behavior can be an indicator of language deprivation or communication neglect, or it can be an indicator of a mental health issue. That could be ADHD, depression, or dysregulation issues. It is imperative to ensure that the child get an appropriate and thorough evaluation and work closely with the team involved to determine a course of action. Language deprivation, communication neglect, mental health, developmental stages, and then the last factor that may cause behavior issues is deaf culture. The more you know about deaf culture, the more you'll understand why the deaf behave the way they do. Things that are considered normal within deaf culture may be considered rude, obnoxious, annoying, insensitive, etc. to hearing people. Some examples include direct and blunt communication. For example, hearing people will say, "Oh, long time no see. You look the same." Hearing people will say that, while deaf people will say, "Oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in so long and you have gained so much weight. What happened?" Deaf people are very blunt, and that can throw hearing people for a loop. But that is a norm in deaf culture, to be very direct and very descriptive. Eye contact, lots of touch and hugging, tapping. Some hearing people don't like that amount of touch, but within deaf culture, that is very normal. Collectivism, the grouping, banging on tables, waving, turning lights off and on, stomping on the floor to get attention. That is a cultural norm. Facial expressions. Some hearing people can be very thrown by the expressive nature of ASL, which is just part of the communication. As you can see, there are several factors that can influence behaviors of deaf and hard of hearing children. Language deprivation, communication neglect, mental health, developmental stages, and deaf culture. However, there is more to it than just the behaviors. Behavior is communicating something to you, to us. Children do not act out for no reason. We often say that when we did not see an incident or situation that could cause those behaviors. We often overlook that there could be internal triggers or emotions that could cause the behaviors. There is always a reason. take the time to find out why they are behaving the way they are. Now, how we respond, provide support, and utilize appropriate strategies is the key to enhancing a sense of self-sufficiency and self-advocacy in children. So here are some things we can do. Learn ASL. What will it hurt? Why not? At dinner time or family gatherings, we gather to talk about our lives and reconnect. This is a place where we nourish ourselves and come together to celebrate important milestones or experiences. Do not let it be a place of loneliness and inaccessibility. By participating in conversations utilizing multiple languages, including sign language, deaf children accumulate more knowledge and information, which leads to increased skills in areas such as problem solving, higher vocabulary and literacy, and leadership. Allow for incidental and informal learning. One thing that I have noticed with etiquette, such as please and thank you, yes ma'am, and yes sir, and no thank you, and those kinds of phrases, we often just think that's just part of how we behave because we overhear that all the time. But deaf children don't have access to that. So we must teach them directly that etiquette in order for them to pick up on it and for them to learn. Another very important thing is access to deaf community support. It's important for deaf children to thrive. Deaf people do not always have that kind of support. How are they to thrive without it? In rural areas, maybe you could take just once a month the time to go visit a town where there are deaf events going on. Next, be mindful of audism, which is discrimination or prejudice against deaf and hard of hearing individuals. Just be mindful of that. Name it, especially with professionals. There are many professionals out there who are still discriminatory. Take the time to point it out and say it out loud to those who are being discriminating or being prejudiced. Arm yourself with knowledge in various areas, such as development, deaf culture, language deprivation, strategies, and so forth. Transitional skills need to happen early on. For example, like maybe showing them how to cook simple things, or maybe having duties around the home like vacuuming and cleaning, things like that. Those are transitional skills that are part of life skills. They help us transition into life as we become older, and budgeting. Those are critical for them to become independent. Last but not least is the question, will my deaf child be normal? Define normal. What is that? What does that look like? Everyone has a different perspective of what normal is or looks like. We all have different life events that can impact us in ways that change how we handle ourselves and problem solve. For example, COVID. We will never return to the normal we had before COVID. So we are adjusting to new ways post-COVID. However, If your deaf child is able to access, and I emphasize the word access, language and incidental learning early on, learn transitional skills, get ongoing support, learn to advocate for themselves, and become self-sufficient, then your child can be a successful, happy, and productive citizen. I say that in general terms because everyone has a different view of what success looks like. Take a moment and read this quote. I hope this helps give you a sense of hope and determination to continue to advocate and support your deaf child as they grow. Thank you.